All right, let's talk about search. Because for decades, it's been about matching keywords. But now, thanks to AI, we're shifting to a world where search doesn't just find what you type, it understands what you mean. And today, we're going to break down exactly how that works.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll look at the actual data showing how our search habits are shifting. Then we'll get into the magic behind it all, semantic search. After that, we'll unpack the architecture, these RAG systems you keep hearing about. And then we'll get into the weeds of what it takes to actually build this stuff at scale. And finally, we'll look at the tools and what's coming next. Let's jump in. Okay, so first things first, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Right, there's a ton of hype out there, isn't there? But what's really going on? What does the data actually say about our behavior? Okay, so check this out. This data from Dados tells a really fascinating story. Now, of course, traditional search engines are still king, no question. But look at those red bars. That's AI tools. In both the US and Europe, they are carving out a small but very steady, very consistent slice of the pie. It's not a tsunami, it's more like a rising tide. And this really echoes what industry expert Rand Fishkin is saying. It's not a complete takeover, not yet anyway, but it is a fundamental shift. So what's the technology that's actually making this possible? Let's get into it. Well, what's driving this change is a huge move away from the old school way of doing things. The core idea we have to get our heads around is something called semantic search. And really, it's all about getting past the literal words you type and understanding your actual intent. It's about figuring out what you really truly mean. And this is where it gets really cool. You can see the difference right here. A keyword search is basically just a checklist. Does the document have revenue, drop, and Europe? Check, check, check. But a semantic search is way smarter. It knows that drop and decline mean the same thing in this context. So it doesn't just find documents, it connects concepts and brings you back a much richer, more useful answer. So how does this magic actually work? Well, it all comes down to something called vector embeddings. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. You take any piece of data, text, an image, even audio, and you turn it into a string of numbers that captures its meaning. It's like giving every concept a coordinate on a giant map, so the system can find other similar concepts nearby. Okay, that's great for searching the whole internet. But what about for a company? How do you give a generative AI, like a chatbot, access to your specific private internal information without spending a fortune to retrain the entire model? Well, that's where this brilliant system called Retrieval-Augmented Generation, or RAG, comes into play. And I love this quote because it perfectly describes what RAG does. It takes a super creative, but sometimes kind of spacey, large language model and gives it a factual, real-time brain based on your data. And the process itself, at least in theory, is actually pretty straightforward. First, you chop up all your documents into smaller, manageable chunks. Then, you turn each of those chunks into one of those vector embeddings we talked about and store them in a special database. So when you ask a question, the system first retrieves the most relevant chunks, and then it hands only those chunks to the AI to create an answer. It's basically giving the AI an open book test where the only book allowed is your company's data. And this is a huge deal, because when you compare it to the old way, which was basically retraining a whole AI model from scratch, RAG just wins hands down. It's more secure because you can control data access. It's way more scalable. Just add a new document, no big deal. And most importantly, it's more trustworthy because it massively cuts down on the AI just making stuff up. But, and this is a big but, there is a world of difference between a cool little demo with a couple of PDFs and making this thing work across thousands of complex documents inside a massive company. Right, because what happens when you go from a handful of documents to, say, your entire company's knowledge base? Well, that simple RAG pipeline we just talked about, it starts to break. And it can break down in some pretty spectacular ways. If you're an architect building this stuff, you've got some major headaches to solve. For one, LLMs have this weird quirk where they kind of ignore information that's buried in the middle of the context you give them. Then there's the classic garbage in, garbage out problem. If you retrieve the wrong info, you're going to get a wrong answer. You also have to worry about splitting a single idea across multiple chunks, which just confuses the AI. And of course, if the search takes too long, the whole thing is useless. So what's the fix? How do you get around all these problems? Well, the solution for any production-grade system isn't just one better search method. It's actually a much smarter two-step process. Okay, stage one. Think of this as the fast retriever. Its job is to cast a really wide net really fast. It might pull back, say, the top 100 possible results. The goal here isn't to be perfect. The goal is just to make sure the right answer is probably somewhere in that big pile. It's all about recall. Then comes stage 2, the powerful re-ranker. Now that you've got your smaller pile of potential answers, this is where the precision comes in. A more powerful and, slower model goes through that list and meticulously scores every single piece, pushing the absolute best, most relevant result to the very top. That's what gets sent to the LLM. You get the best of both worlds, speed and accuracy. Now, as you can probably guess, an architecture this sophisticated has kicked off a whole new ecosystem of tools to make it all happen. So let's take a quick look at the landscape. And man, the space is just exploding. You've got all kinds of players. You've got fully managed vector databases like Pinecone that make it easy to get started. You've open source options like Weaviate for more flexibility. You even have companies like Cohere that specialize in just one part of the puzzle, like building those super powerful re-ranking models. It's a whole new world.
And this really brings us to a bigger point, one that Rand Fishkin nails again here. This isn't just about chatbots. The fundamental principles of semantic search, of understanding user intent, are transforming information discovery everywhere, on every major platform you use.
So this all leads to one final, really big question for the future. We're moving from a world of finding documents to a world of finding answers. So what's next? As these tools get better and better at understanding us, the kinds of questions we ask are going to change completely. We'll stop asking, what were our Q3 sales figures, and start asking things like, what were the key drivers behind our Q3 sales dip, and what 3 strategies could reverse the trend based on our past successful campaigns? We are just scratching the surface of what's possible.